The Convergence. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, a sea of grass rippling under the relentless wind. James Mackenzie shifted in his saddle, his shoulders aching from 2 days of hard riding. Beside him, Samuel Thornton maintained a steady pace, his weathered face set in concentration as he scanned the horizon. "We're making good time," Samuel said, though his tone carried no satisfaction. "Should reach Fort Walsh by tomorrow evening if we keep this pace." James nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to the leather satchel secured across his chest. William Garrett's letter rested inside, protected by oilcloth, evidence that could destroy Cornelius Blackwood and secure the Mackenzie claim forever. If they reached the mounted police in time. "You think he's following?" James asked, voicing the question that had haunted him since they left Medicine Hat. Samuel was quiet for a moment, his eyes still sweeping the landscape. "If he knows what we're carrying, he'd be a fool not to, and Blackwood's many things, but he's no fool." The wind carried the scent of sage and dust. Above them, a hawk circled lazily, riding the thermals. The vast emptiness of the prairie could be deceptive. It felt like they were alone in the world, but James knew better now. Danger could hide in the coulees, behind the scattered stands of poplar, in the shimmering heat that distorted distance. "We'll take turns keeping watch tonight," Samuel continued. "No fire, cold camp." James thought of Eleanor and Thomas back at the homestead, surrounded by neighbors, but still vulnerable. He thought of Sarah, recovering at the Thornton place, her promise to stay safe weighing on his conscience. He'd failed to protect them from this threat, had been so focused on saving the land that he hadn't seen the danger until it was too late. "I should have known," he said quietly. Should have questioned why Blackwood was so interested in failed homesteads. Samuel glanced at him. "You were doing what any man would do, trying to provide for your family. Can't blame yourself for another man's evil." But James did blame himself. He'd brought his family to this harsh land with promises of prosperity, and instead had delivered them into the hands of a murderer. The weight of that failure sat heavy in his chest. 50 miles to the southeast, Daniel Thornton and Peter Reed pushed their horses hard along the trail toward Medicine Hat. They'd been riding since dawn, hoping to intercept a mounted police patrol before it was too late. "There," Peter said suddenly, pointing toward a dust cloud in the distance. "Riders coming this way." Daniel's heart quickened. As they drew closer, he could make out the distinctive red serge coats of the Northwest Mounted Police. 3 riders, moving at a steady trot. "Thank God," Daniel breathed, spurring his horse forward. The patrol's leader, a sergeant with steel-gray hair and a weathered face, raised his hand to halt his men as Daniel and Peter approached. His eyes assessed them quickly. 2 young homesteaders, their horses lathered with sweat, urgency written in every line of their bodies. "Sergeant William Morrison," the officer introduced himself. "What's the emergency?" Daniel fought to catch his breath. "We need your help. There's a man named Cornelius Blackwood. He's pursuing 2 homesteaders who are carrying evidence of murder. They're heading to Fort Walsh, but Blackwood left Medicine Hat 2 days ago with hired guns. He's going to try to stop them." Morrison's expression hardened. Blackwood. "We've had questions about him. Land speculation, intimidation of homesteaders. But murder? 6 years ago, he killed a miner named William Garrett," Peter explained quickly. "Took over a silver mine on what's now the Mackenzie claim. The Mackenzies found evidence, a letter from Garrett describing everything. James Mackenzie and Samuel Thornton are taking it to Fort Walsh. And Blackwood knows they have this evidence?" "He knows," Daniel confirmed. "He's desperate, Sergeant. He's abandoned everything in Medicine Hat. We think he's planning to ambush them before they reach the fort." Morrison exchanged glances with his men, then nodded decisively. "Show us the route they'd be taking." Daniel's mind raced through the geography. The most direct path to Fort Walsh from the Mackenzie homestead goes northwest, following 40 Mile Creek for water. There's rough country about 30 miles out, coulees and ravines where someone could set an ambush. "How much of a head start do your friends have?" "Half a day when they left. But Blackwood might have fresher horses, and he knows this country better than most." Morrison turned to his men. "We ride hard. If Blackwood's planning an ambush in that rough country, we need to get there first." He looked back at Daniel and Peter. "You two have done well. Head back to your families. With respect, Sergeant, I'm coming with you, Daniel said firmly. I promised someone I'd bring her father home safe. Morrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Mount up, then. We've got ground to cover. As they rode northwest, Daniel thought of Sarah, her gray eyes meeting his, the way she'd looked at him when he'd promised to help. He'd made her a vow, and he intended to keep it. At the Mackenzie homestead, Eleanor stood in the doorway of the soddy, watching the sun sink toward the western horizon. The Olsons had returned to their own claim that morning, but the Reeds and another family, the Campbells, remained. Their presence was both comfort and reminder of how drastically their situation had changed. "Mama?" Thomas appeared at her elbow, his young face still carrying shadows of fear. "When will Papa be back?" "A few more days, sweetheart," Eleanor said, resting her hand on his shoulder. "He and Mr. Thornton will bring the police, and then everything will be settled." She wished she felt as confident as she sounded. 3 days had passed since James left, and every hour stretched like a week. She kept herself busy, cooking for their guests, tending the garden, maintaining the routines that gave structure to anxiety. But beneath it all, fear gnawed at her. Mary Campbell approached from the garden, carrying a basket of beans. "Eleanor, you should rest. You've been on your feet since dawn." "I'm fine," Eleanor said automatically, then caught herself. She'd spent so long refusing help, maintaining the fiction that the Mackenzies could handle everything alone. That pride had nearly cost them everything. "Actually, thank you. I could use a moment to sit." Mary smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Go on, I'll start supper." Eleanor walked to the well, drawing up a bucket of cool water. As she drank from the ladle, she allowed herself to feel the weight of exhaustion. The siege, the fear, the constant vigilance, it had all taken its toll. But they'd survived. More than that, they'd discovered something precious. They weren't alone. The isolation that had defined their first 3 years on the prairie had been an illusion, maintained by pride and stubbornness. Their neighbors had come when called, had stood with them against violence and greed. She thought of Sarah at the Thornton homestead, healing from her injuries. Her daughter had grown so much in these past weeks, from a restless girl dreaming of escape to a young woman who'd risked everything to save her family. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt for not seeing it sooner, for not recognizing Sarah's strength and capability. "Mrs. Mackenzie," John Reed's voice cut through her thoughts. He was pointing east toward a dust cloud on the horizon. "Riders coming!" Eleanor's heart seized. Too soon for James to be returning. She set down the ladle and walked quickly toward the house, where the rifle still rested against the doorframe. The men gathered, watching the approaching riders. As they drew closer, Eleanor could make out 4 figures. Not Blackwood's men. The lead rider wore a red coat. "Mounted police," John Reed said, relief evident in his voice. But Eleanor's relief was tempered by confusion. Why were they here instead of at Fort Walsh? Had something happened to James? The patrol rode into the yard, and the sergeant dismounted, removing his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Mackenzie? I'm Sergeant Morrison. We're looking for your husband and Samuel Thornton. We have reason to believe they may be riding into danger." Eleanor's blood ran cold. What kind of danger? "Cornelius Blackwood left Medicine Hat 2 days ago with armed men. We believe he's pursuing your husband to prevent evidence from reaching Fort Walsh. We need to know exactly which route they took." Thomas pressed against Eleanor's side, and she wrapped her arm around him protectively. "They followed 40 Mile Creek northwest. Samuel knows the country. He said it was the fastest route with reliable water." Morrison nodded grimly. "That's what we thought. There's rough country about 30 miles out, perfect place for an ambush. We're riding to intercept them." "I'm coming with you," Eleanor said suddenly. The sergeant shook his head. "Ma'am, with respect." "That's my husband out there," Eleanor interrupted, her voice steel. "And I'm the one who found the evidence that started all this. I'm coming." Morrison studied her, this prairie woman who'd survived a siege, who stood straight-backed despite the fear in her eyes. He saw something in her that reminded him of the land itself, unyielding, resilient. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Better than most men," Eleanor said. It was true. She'd learned as a girl in Ontario, and the prairie had honed that skill. "Mama, no!" Thomas cried, clutching her skirt. Eleanor knelt down, taking her son's face in her hands. Thomas, I need you to be brave. Mrs. Campbell will look after you, but I have to go help your father. But what if something happens to you too? Eleanor pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his hair. Nothing's going to happen. The police will keep us safe, and your father needs to know his family is fighting for him, just like he's fighting for us. She stood, looking at Mary Campbell, who nodded, understanding. I'll watch him like my own. 5 minutes later, Eleanor was mounted on their best horse, wearing James's spare coat against the evening chill. As they rode out, she looked back once at the homestead, the soddy that had sheltered them, the fields they'd worked so hard to cultivate, the land they'd nearly died defending. Then she turned her face northwest, toward the rough country where her husband rode unknowing into danger, and pressed her heels to the horse's flanks. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere ahead, in the gathering darkness, 3 separate parties were converging on the same stretch of wild country, and only one of them knew what was coming. James and Samuel made camp in a shallow coulee as twilight deepened into night. They'd traveled far off the trail, choosing concealment over convenience. No fire, as Samuel had promised, just cold jerky and water from their canteens. Get some sleep, Samuel said quietly. I'll take first watch. James lay back on his bedroll, staring up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. The vastness above mirrored the emptiness around them, beautiful and indifferent to human struggle. He thought of Eleanor's face when he'd left, the mixture of fear and determination. He thought of Thomas, trying so hard to be brave, and Sarah, who'd started all this by finding those letters, who'd nearly died in that mine shaft. His family had paid such a high price for this land, and now, carrying evidence that could finally secure their future, he felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. If he failed, if Blackwood caught them, everything they'd endured would be for nothing. Samuel, he said quietly into the darkness. Yeah? Thank you for everything. You didn't have to. James, Samuel interrupted gently. Out here, we're all we've got. You do the same for me. Would he? James wanted to believe so, but he'd spent 3 years keeping his family isolated, refusing help, maintaining walls of pride. It had taken a crisis to show him what he should have known all along. Survival on the prairie wasn't about self-sufficiency, it was about community. I would, James said finally. I will. Samuel chuckled softly. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. James closed his eyes, but sleep was slow to come. The prairie night was full of sounds. Wind in the grass, the distant yip of coyotes, the soft movement of their picketed horses. Any of those sounds could mask approaching danger. Somewhere in the darkness, Cornelius Blackwood was out there hunting them. And somewhere else, unknown to James, help was racing to reach them first. The prairie held its breath, waiting for dawn and the convergence that would determine everything. James finally drifted into uneasy sleep, unaware that by tomorrow night, the fate of his family, his land, and his future would be decided, one way or another.